So now it is truly my pleasure, quite honestly, to welcome our keynote address speaker, Amy Goyer, today. Amy Goyer is AARP's National Family and Caregiver Expert and author of Juggling Life, Work and Caregiving. A passionate champion for caregivers, she has spent her entire adult life caring for her grandparents, parents, and sister. Amy has more than 35 years of experience working in the field of aging, and she shares her personal caregiving journey as well as practical, actionable tips for caregiving in her columns and videos. She is a sought-after speaker and moderates AARP's Facebook Family Caregiving Discussion Group. A widely quoted media authority, Amy has been a frequent guest on NBC Today. She is also an author. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Amy Goyer. Amy, are you able to join us this morning?
Can you see me? Can you hear me?
I can see you and I can hear you. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Excellent. I am so happy to be with you back in Rhode Island again. It's been a while. I wanted to let you know that I was also an Alzheimer's caregiver for more than once. This is my mom and dad. I'm going to start out by telling you a little bit about my caregiving journey. I think there will be things that you can all identify with. I've had a vast experience with caregiving with multiple family members, and I find that there's always something in my journey that you will find similar to yours. I'm going to start out by telling you about my family and share some of my own very personal photos and videos with you. So this is my mom and dad, Robert and Patricia. And our caregiving journey starts with them. So the most important thing to me is that you are able to meet them. They can't be here today, but I have a video. So I think, they say a picture is better than 1,000 words. Well, I think a video is even better.
Go for it. In Indiana, and it seems that I can see the flickering candlelight ain't shining bright through the sycamores at me. The new mown hay gives all its fragrance from the field I've used to roam. Oh, the moonlight's fair tonight along the Wabash. Then I long for my Indiana. Home, 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 home. Period. Yay, Daddy! Yay, Mommy!
And that was the big finish. So basically, that's all you need to know about my parents. You can see who's in charge. Mom was telling him to stay in the picture. Dad's exuberant and loved to sing. My dad went off to college, and then he wasn't drafted. He volunteered so he could go into officers' corps for World War II. And he was in the 10th Mountain Division in World War II, and they ended the war in Italy, and then a few days later in all of Europe. The Nazis gave up. So I always said my dad ended World War II, at least in my eyes. He went back to college and met my mom, the beautiful Patricia, and they dated in college. They graduated. My dad went on to graduate school in radio, and then my mom taught high school, but they got engaged, and they were married in 1952 in Indianapolis, Indiana. You can probably guess from the song that our story begins in Indiana. And not too long after they got married, the Korean War happened, and Dad was recalled. He had stayed in the reserves. So their marriage started out with travel. They went, he was stationed in Germany, and so they were able to go to Germany, and that's where my mom had her first baby. Now, they had an adorable little daughter. Well, actually, they had 4 adorable daughters. I am the youngest of those 4. I was not the one born in Germany. My oldest sister, Karen, was. You can see my dad went on to get his PhD at Ohio State, and he became a professor of communication. He taught at Purdue University. That's where I was born. And my mom stayed home with us kids until 3rd grade, and then she got her master's degree, and she taught at the university and did all kind of various jobs. We had moved to Athens, Ohio when I was 5 years old, and my dad taught at Ohio University. But he was kind of the gentleman farmer. We also had a farm about 10 miles outside of town, and we had horses and chickens and cows. And I grew up riding horses and had really a wonderful, idyllic childhood. I went on to go to Ohio University myself. And yes, I was the Ohio University Bobcat. Every parent's dream to have their child put that weird head thing on and dance around and be weird. But then my dad got a job when I was a sophomore in college. My dad got a job at Arizona State University, way across the country. So off we went there. I did go back and finish college in Ohio. And my next oldest sister, who was still at home, my older 2 sisters were married. She went back to Ohio also eventually with me. In the meantime, my grandparents were aging. My mom was from Indianapolis, Indiana. This is her grandmother Clara. My grandfather had died right before my parents moved. My mom had a brother and a sister in town and my cousins. And so my grandmother had a fair amount of support. So my role with her, as I graduated from college with a degree in music therapy and went to Columbus, Ohio, and worked in adult daycare centers and nursing homes. And then I worked for the Ohio Department of Aging. So I was about 3 hours away from her. So I would be the respite caregiver. She never drove. And so I would take her to the store and take her to church and just visit and help her do things around the house and provide socialization, and just, I adored my grandmother. I just loved spending time with her. In the meantime, my dad's parents lived in South Bend, Indiana, which was about 6.5 hours from Columbus, where I was living. And my grandmother Genevieve, there on the left, developed Alzheimer's disease. My grandfather was 10 years older than she. He was her primary caregiver for a long time with help from us in various ways. For example, I helped him start dealing with incontinence. He had no clue. He was putting garbage bags down on the bed at night. And so I got pads and I got him, adult briefs and all the things that can be helpful with incontinence. He was amazing, really. He was a military man, and grandmother had always taken care of him. And he cussed every other word. He was quite a character. I adored him. He did the very best he could and really taught me a lot about how people can change and step up when they really need to. I also went over and checked on them. We would hire caregivers for them. I would go check and make sure they were okay. When they were in the hospital, I'd go, things like that. My dad flew over as much as he could, but you know how that is when you're so far away as a long distance caregiver. Dad eventually started help managing their finances when granddaddy got to a point where he couldn't quite handle that. As you can see, I again was brought some joy to them. I put up the Christmas tree and I put on records on their old Victrola, and we would dance and just had sort of a more involved care role than with my other grandmother. But my dad was the power of attorney and dealt with those kinds of things. Now, in the middle of all that, my poor dad, my poor mom had a stroke. She was only 63 years old. So daddy had his parents, his mother with Alzheimer's, and then my mom had the stroke. I had just started a new job and didn't have any leave. And people donated. The state of Ohio had a program where people could donate leave. So as caregivers, as you know, we all face terrible work issues many, many times, and getting enough leave and dealing with work. I was so fortunate because they had that program, and I was able to go for 2 weeks and help get my mom into a good rehab. Again, this is the field I was working in, and I was also the youngest. I was not married, didn't have children. So it made sense for me to do that. But when I left, my other sister came, and we took turns for a while as mom and dad struggled to kind of figure out what their new normal was going to be. Mom had aphasia. She, she knew what she wanted to say and couldn't get the words out. She had some apraxia. She had pain, chronic pain on her right side, but she was not paralyzed. And she got a great deal of therapy, and she did amazingly well, but was never able to drive again, couldn't cook herself, and things like that. My dad finally retired after my grandparents passed away, and he was 72 when he retired. He did all the right things. He got involved in his 10th Mountain Division Veterans Group. You can see we went to one of the reunions, and he got to put on the rucksack and carry the equipment that he actually carried back in World War II, and that meant so much to him. My parents traveled. We went to Scotland together. My dad exercised. He worked out with a trainer, and he swam in the pool in their yard. We had family gatherings. My mom went almost everywhere with my dad, and he was her caregiver in many, many ways. And it was little things like putting on her earrings for her and fixing her hair and, things like that. But, having that overall responsibility for everything else, managing the finances and just managing everything certainly was a strain. So he did a lot of really good things to kind of counteract all that as a caregiver. But we noticed around the time about 10 years later, when my dad was in his early 80s, we started to notice some changes in him. And the thing we had been dreading, because his mother had Alzheimer's, it did happen. And my dad developed dementia as well. In the beginning, very, very mild symptoms. He would repeat the questions. He was clearly having trouble sometimes tracking things. He was still handling everyday things quite well, but I could tell that stress was hard on him. One time he went in his office when I was visiting there, and by this time I had moved to Washington, D.C. So I was traveling across the country every chance I could get, spending time with them, making sure, taking care of things as they were aging. And my dad would go in his office and try to say, I'm going to go pay the bills. And I went in an hour later, and he had stacks of paper with Post-it notes on them saying, ask Amy. So there were a lot of things that he was starting to struggle with. What happened as well was my dad had glaucoma, and his vision started being compromised. Some of his reflexes when he was driving didn't seem quite as good. So we really wanted him to stop driving. Before we actually asked him to stop driving, I quit my job at AARP as a full-time employee and became a consultant so I could have more flexibility to travel out there and take care of my parents. And it was, I did a lot of work because I could do it from home, which lots of people are doing now with the pandemic. But for me, that was a flexibility that I really needed at the time. So I set up an office in their house. This is the day that I got my office set up, and I think they were just so happy and relieved to know I was going to be around more. So I would go there every month for a week or two and work from there and help them out with things. But as I said, I started noticing things. They were eating a lot of Burger King. My dad had been the cook after Mom's stroke, and he was getting hard for him, or he was tired of it, or it's hard to tell whether he really could do and remember how to do the things he had been doing. And then, as I mentioned, we wanted him to stop driving. And that's kind of a game changer. Well, my dad said, we're going to move. We don't want to be stuck in this home. We have to go live in a senior community where there's transportation. And he had kind of been wanting to do that for a while because he was kind of tired of taking care of the house and everything. My mom had wanted to stay in the house. But that's what we did. I visited 12 facilities in the area. Thankfully, in the Phoenix area, there are a lot of options. Took them to 3 of them, and they chose one that was just 2 miles from their house. So we did what I call the big move, and loaded things up on 2 men in a truck and set up their apartment. They had a 2-bedroom apartment in independent living, but there were services that could be added on. And of course, they had their evening meal, and I think they could have lunch as well. But we set it up as home, and I did my best to set up the apartment in as similar ways for their house, so that Dad had less change. I knew the change was going to be harder for him with the dementia. did amazingly well. It took him probably 2 months to find all the light switches and get into the routine of it, but he did, and he really transitioned amazingly. And mom settled in really well too. They danced in the living room, and then I knew it was going to be okay, and that was home for them. And they'd lived in a lot of places during their marriage, and they adapted incredibly well and enjoyed the socialization they were getting at the senior community. Meanwhile, I have a life, and this is my boyfriend, Bill. He was a captain in the fire department in Baltimore County, Maryland. And so at the point that my parents moved into the senior community, I moved into their house so I could be nearby and help manage things as they got older and needed more and more help. Leaving Bill behind in Baltimore County, I maintained an apartment in the Washington, D.C. area, actually where I am right now, because my work was primary back there. AARP was my biggest client, and I had some other clients in the area. So I would travel back here and get to see him sometimes once a month. Sometimes it was several months without getting to see him. Around this time, this little guy joined our crew. This is Mr. Jackson, and he was my dad's service dog. He really looked after both mom and dad, as you can see in these images. He was with my dad's constant companion for 8 years. My dad got to a point where he had lots of anxiety. He was always wanting to know, what am I supposed to be doing next? What's happening? What am I supposed to be doing next? And with Jackson, as long as he had a hold of Jackson's leash, he felt more safe and secure, especially going out and leaving the home. They could walk around the senior community, and I would watch sometimes, and if dad went in the wrong building, Jackson hightailed him right back home to the right building. He was my partner in caregiving, and he became really my best friend too. And he was the one who was with me through the entire journey. My mom started having a lot of falls, and she fell and fractured her spine in 2 places. She had to have surgery, which she chose to have, even though it was a very risky surgery. And she did well with the surgery. And so they planned a second surgery. But in the meantime, she developed C. diff in the hospital, and she developed AFib. They got that treated, did the second surgery, sent her to rehab, and she had a heart attack, congestive heart failure, pneumonia, sepsis, urinary tract infection. Everything went crazy. So she went back in the hospital. We almost lost her then, but she pulled through. My mom looked so fragile, but she was so strong in so many ways, and she fought back. I was with her every day of those 40 days and nights, except for 5 nights. My sister came and spent the night at the hospital with her. And I wanted to be with her all the time because my mom had a communication disorder. She couldn't advocate for herself. And I can tell you that from that experience kind of gave me hospital PTSD. I have a hard time being in hospitals because the C. diff is very difficult. She would be screaming in pain, and I was trying to help her. I mean, I helped the techs and the nurses do everything with her. And I'm sure many of you have had similar experiences and traumas. But like I said, she went through therapy, went back to rehab there on the same campus where their apartment was, because it was a continuing care retirement community. So Daddy could walk over every day with Jackson. Jackson learned the route very quickly. And they would, visit with Mom. And I had to be there every day because the mistakes that were made, I could go on and on and on. Wrong medications, reactions to medications they were ignoring, all kinds of things like that. But my incredible mom learned to walk again and went back to their apartment. And nobody was happier than Mr. Jackson to have both of them in one place again. But 2 months later, my dad got sick. And in the meantime, I had been afraid to leave my mom alone because I was afraid she would fall again. So I was spending the night almost every night in their apartment, and I'm working full time the whole time through all of this. My dad developed a prostate inflammation issue, constantly go to the bathroom over the course of a weekend, and I could see he was getting increasingly anxious and a little more confused. And so I got him to the hospital, and it was quite an ordeal because one of the things that happened with Dad is if you tried to give him medication that calmed him down, it had the opposite effect. And so I told them not to give him the medication, and they gave it to him anyway during the night before I could get to the hospital. A doctor who wasn't even there, the nurse had called and had them give it to him, even though it was noted in the chart. So for 3 days, he was bouncing off the walls. We spent Christmas in the hospital that year. My sisters and I do our best to stay festive. My oldest sister was not able to travel and be with us that year, but these are me and 2 of my other sisters. And of course, Mr. Jackson got into the act too. Daddy did come home from the hospital right after Christmas, but he came home with a feeding tube because he had a flap in his esophagus called a Zenker's diverticulum, and he aspirated and got pneumonia. And the doctors convinced me that it was too risky, that it could happen again. He should have the feeding tube until he could get the throat surgery he needed. And looking back, I wouldn't have done it again. It was extremely hard for him. He couldn't understand that he was attached to that pole. It got clogged 4 times. We were back in the hospital with it 3 of those times. It was really hard and difficult to work with. And in the midst of that, we had a terrible family tragedy, and that my niece Shaylee, had bipolar disorder, and she lived there in Arizona. She was very close with my parents. She had been working in the senior community where they lived, and we lost her to suicide at age 19. And it was extremely, extremely hard on my parents. Of course, we were all just floored, and I wanted to just go to bed and not get up for days on end, but I had to because I had to take care of my parents. And my dad understood when I told him. He grasped who it was and what had happened, and he was very sad, and he went into comforting mode for me and Mom. And then by the next day, he didn't understand it at all, didn't know what we were talking about, and he never really did talk about Shaylee again. So the trauma of that affected, and often that happens with dementia. A trauma will kind of cause a downward slide and a plateau. But I had to get him surgery. So it, again, was 2 months. We got the surgery. He did incredibly well. Mr. Jackson oversaw his recovery. And he finally ate a full meal again. And that was the first time Mom and I actually, I think, really felt happy since my niece had died, just to see him. My dad loved to eat, I'm telling you. So it was really great to see him eat a good meal again. But in the meantime, I was paying for extra care for my mom. When I was with Dad in the hospital, I was still trying to work full time. And, it was just getting to be so much. I started paying people to be with my parents. Clearly, they needed 24/7 care at this point. And I knew something had to change. My dad was a veteran, as I mentioned, and he would not be eligible for aid and attendance benefits until we sold the farm in Ohio, because we had kept it all these years and my sister was living there. Very, very difficult to do. That land had been in our family a long time, and it had become a financial drain, and my parents needed the money for their care. So that was a very difficult step. But then we started getting some assistance. It took a year to get that aid and attendance benefit. So I moved Mom and Dad back in the house with me, and I could provide more of the care that way. I hired a live-in caregiver. And when I was out of town, I paid my sister from Ohio to come and kind of be me and provide some of the care as well. So we kind of developed a new system. My mom was very glad to be back in the house. My dad immediately didn't recognize anything. Whereas the week before, he had come for dinner and he knew where everything was and went outside and checked his orange tree and his lemon tree. But when they moved back in, it completely threw him off. So again, these changes and these traumas can really make a big difference. We did have no hospitalizations for a whole year. So that was, the best part of it. And in the meantime, my oldest sister, Karen, was becoming very ill. She had Cushing disease, and it's a tumor on your pituitary gland, which makes your body produce too much cortisol. And she became diabetic. It affected her heart, her skin, in multiple ways. And they had 2 surgeries to try to remove that tumor and never fully got it out. I had gone here in this picture. I was her power of attorney as well. She lived on the eastern shore of Maryland, and she had had complications. I was there for the surgery, and I was starting to feel really, really stressed and pulled in so many different directions. We had Dad's 90th birthday. I had came back in town just in time. We had a celebration for him, went out for a really lovely dinner. And the next morning, my mom couldn't get out of bed, and she became very, very sick, very, very fast. She had a urinary tract infection, and it went septic the first day in the hospital. They came in and told me that she had in sepsis. And as I was sitting next to her, she coded, and I had to do not resuscitate in that hospital, but they rushed in with a crash cart and whisked her off to ICU, not asking me. I had no idea what was happening. It was happening so fast, and they intubated her. So she was in ICU. And of course, then I had to make that decision to remove that life support, which she didn't really want in the first place. So that was a lesson learned, and always have a copy of your DNR posted in the hospital room, posted at home. Make sure that you're prepared. I just didn't know she was that sick when we at the time, and they had just told me she was septic. Well, she had overcome sepsis before. I just didn't get it. And I will say that it gave time for my sisters and my boyfriend to come so that they could be there when we said goodbye. But it was a very difficult thing to do. And it was so hard on my dad. He was with us at the hospital and didn't fully seem to know it was her. He kind of seemed to know it was her. It was really hard to tell. But once after that, he'd get up in the morning, say, "Where's Patricia? Where's my wife?" And he was with it enough still that I couldn't lie to him and say, "Oh, she'll be back later," over and over. I wasn't going to, sometimes, they talk about, I can't remember what the term is, but, you have to sometimes make things up to help people through these things. I did not do that. I wanted to give him the opportunity to grieve. And he did. And so, yes, he kept asking, but it got less and less. And then he would say, "Oh," as soon as he asked me, say, "Oh, I remember, she's not here anymore." And eventually he stopped asking. And every now and then he'd say, "I miss my wife." And Mr. Jackson was grieving too, but he did not leave. He was, as you can see, very concerned about my dad. But Dad also was still my daddy, and he would comfort me. And I was not afraid to show my emotions around him and show that I was sad or that I was overwhelmed. And he continued to have that role in his life. And I think that was a gift to him too, to be who he was. That was such a big part of his identity. We still had many joyful moments. Dad was a performer, so he continued with that.
There you got it.
Nice. I started acupuncture for my dad. I had started acupuncture to help with my grief, and I asked the acupuncturist if she could work with someone who had dementia. She said she never had, but she would try. And she started with just using magnets instead of needles, and gradually worked up to very small needles. We continued it for about 5 years. And it made a huge difference for my dad. He would have a cognitive boost after his sessions. It helped a lot with the anxieties and what some people call agitation. I don't like that word, but it's anxiety. He would be nervous and anxious about things. And he responded incredibly well. They would give him a massage first, which really helped because Daddy loved massage, and he got a massage once a week for many, many years. A year after my mom died, I got a call that my sister had collapsed, and I flew to Maryland and found myself in the same position I had been in with my mom a year before. She was intubated. She did not have a DNR. She was only 62 years old. And we had to make that decision again to remove her life support, and she did not revive. So we lost her just a year after my mom. Being her power of attorney, I also managed her estate. So I had to empty her house out in the midst of still caring for my dad it took about 6 months of trips to Maryland. She had a lot of stuff in her house. And when we finally sold it, it sold for less than was owed to the bank. And the bank refused to reimburse me the $5,000 or so that I had spent in keeping the house going, keeping the utilities on while we were emptying it out, taking care of the house, etc. So that was a financial loss, but it was a very difficult process, saying goodbye to my sister so young, and going through her things. And it was, a lot of grief. We had lost 3 years in a row. We had lost family members. But Daddy was still there, and we had to spend a lot of time together.
How about, oh, we ain't got a barrel of money. Maybe we're ragged and funny, but we'll travel alone, singing a song, side by side. Oh, we don't.
So I ask you to watch this.
Tomorrow.
You can see his affect is very flat. And you can see that he's not singing all the words. He's singing some of them, but he's right in sync with me. He's right in the rhythm.
Just as long as we're together, it doesn't matter. That's right. Oh, we've all had our quarrels, and
so many people at this phase in dementia will have a hard time connecting with their loved ones because of the flat affect. If you didn't know,
singing a song, side by side, bum diddly da dum, bop bop. Yay, Daddy!
So you can see that music was my greatest tool in caring for my dad. It became our constant companion. Again, I have training as a music therapist, but anyone can do this. We used music. Singing a lot of times would distract him when he was getting anxious. It was a way to connect. You can see how closely connected we were in that. He was right in sync with me. We used it to motivate him to exercise. We used it to help him wake up gradually. We used it to get him going when he was, dragging. We used it to calm him when he had a shower. A million ways. And I have some videos on YouTube and some articles on the AARP website about how I used music in these ways. In the meantime, Mr. Jackson was aging and developed several health problems. He had pancreatitis and inflammatory bowel disease, and he had cancer. So we had to say goodbye to Mr. Jackson in May of 2017. And it was very, very hard for Daddy and for me, because again, he had been kind of our constant companion. Mr. Jackson got the same care that everybody else in the family did. He had acupuncture. He had little doggy massage. I had him swim in my bathtub for physical therapy. We did everything we could to keep him pain-free. He had surgeries. He didn't want to leave Daddy, and Daddy didn't want him to leave him. And we did the best we could, but there came a point where he was in pain too much that it couldn't be managed. And we had to say goodbye. And again, saw Daddy have a big downturn when Mr. Jackson was gone. Much more sleeping, less connected with us, but he still loved to go for rides in the car. So I'd get him in the car and we'd go get a cake pop. We had many moments of joy as well. You just sometimes have to look at the joy in different ways. They're moments, not the big things as much. Then moments like this happen. This was after my dad's massage. I had someone come to the house. He had been doing massages since he retired. And again, I could see how it helped him so much. So I had someone come to the house and give him a massage once a week. And this was after his massage, and he hadn't been dancing with me for a long time at this point. And it was amazing. And the massage therapist grabbed his phone and videotaped us.
They seem to say, you have stolen my heart. Now don't go away. As we sing love's old sweet song on moonlight day. On moonlight day. Ba-da-da-da. Okay. Yay, Daddy.
Now there's a little smile there. I don't know if you caught it.
Thank you so much.
Then he just shrugged his shoulder. Oh, it's nothing. I knew what he was trying to say. So sometimes those words aren't coming out quite right, but he was just saying, oh, it was nothing. You know, that was something that was how he would have reacted always. So those things are gifts. Dad developed congestive heart failure and started out with oxygen at night and eventually had oxygen during the day as well. We lost my dad in June of 2018. He had developed seizures as well with his dementia. And there was one day when he had seizures all day long, and they were very petit mal seizures, very mild. He would look to the left, and sometimes he would have a little twitching, but he would be exhausted afterwards. And he wouldn't eat or drink, you know, for hours and hours. And when he had so many of them, and we had a feeling, you know, that it was happening. And I called my sister. My sister called my other sister who came from California, and we were all with him that night. But he died in his sleep. None of us were in the room when he passed. I got up and every 2 hours and checked and found that he had gone on. And it was devastating. You know, at this point, I'd cared for my dad for 10 or 12 years, you know, starting from the very beginning with mildest symptoms. And he was still a huge light. He was still a joy to be with in so many ways. And it was such an honor and a pleasure and a joy to care for him. Now, I want to share with you the book. Annie mentioned my book, Juggling Life, Work, and Caregiving. And I wrote it that way because that's kind of how it's been for me, trying to manage all these parts of my life, trying to have a life, do your work, and caring for multiple people at one time. It's a lot. And I know many of you are struggling in similar ways. So I want to share with you some of the things I've learned along the way. It's now been almost 4 years since Daddy died, and I still am struggling in some ways. Life after caregiving isn't always easy because we've been so intensely involved in the caregiving. Sure, there were certain things that, you know, it was kind of nice to be able to sleep at night and certain things, but mostly I missed him. And all the other grief that I had kind of felt but postponed somewhat because I was caring for my dad still, it all piled up at that point. So I've been dealing with that, and I've also been dealing with the financial fallout of it. You may have seen an article about me in the Wall Street Journal recently. I did end up in bankruptcy. And, you know, it's a very hard thing to talk about. I'm a caregiving expert. I did everything I could for my family, and I'm not a financial expert. And I wish I had had a financial planner working with me. I worked with my parents' financial planner on their finances and focused on that, but wasn't careful enough with my own finances. So that's one thing that I urge you in terms of lessons learned. Here are 3 of my 3 top tips. So the first thing is this what your to-do list looks like? Everything's on it? That's how mine always looks. Well, my first tip is that you have to build a team. I learned that I can do anything. I mean, I did things I never thought I could ever do, but I can. I can't do everything though. And that's a very different thing. It's not, you know, there are things I kept thinking I should be able to pull out of these financial strains. but I can't do everything. No one can do everything. So it helps to build a team. And that team are people who are going to fill the gaps. You have to be realistic about what people will and won't do. With my sisters, we each had different roles. And you have to accept that some people aren't going to do what you want them to do, but maybe we need to just accept what they're doing, because I often tell people, if you focus so much on being angry about what they're not doing, it's sucking your own energy and it's not helpful. So you try to get really practical and just focus on, okay, they will come and clean the house. Maybe they won't care for mom and dad hands on, but they'll do that, or they'll send money, or they'll send food, or they'll, how, in what way can they contribute? My oldest sister, Karen, was very ill. She didn't have money. She lived across the country, and it was hard for her. She really wanted to help with my parents. And I said, why don't you call them every day? So she did that. She called them every single day. And she would, even when she was sick, she'd set her alarm to wake up and call mom and dad. And that made such a difference for my parents and for us as the caregivers. It gave us a little break. You have to think about where people are located, long distance, and what their budgets are. And you also have to have good communication with your team and show appreciation. Who's on the team? Well, if my team had only been family, it would have been a really, really small team. But my team consisted of all these people: friends, neighbors, the faith community, paid caregivers, respite programs, the VA, doctors, pharmacists. Mobile health care was a lifesaver for us. The lawyers, the educators, elder care mediators, social workers, case managers, the staff were in the facility where my parents lived for a while. All of the therapists. We had speech and physical therapy many times. I had an exercise guy who'd come in and exercise with my dad sometimes. Many people have meal delivery services or housekeeping. I had a house cleaner once a month, and that just lifted some of the burden for me. Yard care services, home repair and modification, chore services. My mom's hairstylist was like part of the family and would come to the house if we couldn't get her there, or would go pick her up and bring her to his salon every Friday if I was out of town and I couldn't take her. The support groups, caregiver support groups are part of your team. Social media groups, like online groups like AARP has a Facebook group for caregivers. Again, I mentioned the VA, the Area Agencies on Aging, the Alzheimer's Association, all of the organizations. And AARP is one of those organizations that's here to be a part of your team. When you look at this, you don't feel quite so alone. And everybody needs to build the biggest team they possibly can. Even the valet parking guy at the mall was part of our caregiving team, because it's hot in Arizona and you can't go walk around outside in the summer. So we would go to the mall and walk around, and he'd get the wheelchair out of the trunk, and he'd help with dad, and he'd help with mom, and help with Jackson. He was absolutely the sweetest guy, and we rely on him. There's also support for the caregiver as part of the team, and that includes things like running errands, people who watered my plants for me, who mowed the grass, friends who would come in and help me sort and organize the mail. I had a concierge named Debbie, who she helped me take my parents to the symphony one time because I just needed another set of hands. There are so many people who are willing to help. Many of them are uncomfortable helping directly with your loved ones, but they'll do stuff for you. And that does ease the stress and free up your time. So think about who can support you. There were so many people that helped with us. This little cafe where my parents always went, they were so kind to my parents, and they gave us all kinds of extra treatment because they knew my parents for so long. My nephews helped. Again, my sister called every day, but she also sent my dad and mom greeting cards on a regular basis. My sister Susie helped me empty out my sister Karen's house, and she has a great sense of humor. So one day it was pouring rain while we were doing it, and we wore garbage bags. Sometimes humor is what gets you through. My boyfriend came and took the garage, which looked like this, and turned it into that. He also came and put a heater in the bathroom for my dad's, which made showers so much easier for him. And he would help out, but he came out 2 or 3 times a year and helped out with things there. I mentioned organizations. The VA, if you're caring for a veteran, absolutely look into the supports. They were game changers for us. We had mobile x-rays and mobile swallow tests and mobile lab tests. All these things are available to come to the home in many, many areas now. So I really urge you to look into that option. We had the VA sent ramps. So these guys from the mobility specialists, they were all veterans who worked for the organization, and they put together these amazing ramps for us so that, you know, Daddy could walk in and out of the house, the front yard, the backyard, and also in the garage there where we went to the car. There's also organizations like the American Heart Association has lots of great information, the Diabetes Association, Alzheimer's Association, Alzheimer's Foundation, and AARP. So I want to encourage you to look at all of us as part of your team. And AARP has a lot of great resources for you. I want to go through these really quickly. You're going to get a handout with all these links, and someone is going to be posting some of these links in the chat so you can click on them. But don't worry, because you're going to be able to get access to all of these. We have a really robust caregiving site. I write a column there. We have a lawyer who writes a column. We have a psychiatrist who writes a column. And we have all kinds of very helpful and practical information. It's also available in Spanish. And we also have these free family caregiving guides that you can either order a print copy or you can download them at aarp.org/prepare-to-care. We have a financial workbook. This is a newer resource, and it's really a very practical with checklists and a big help. I wish that I'd had this along my caregiving journey. We have AARP books, including my book, Juggling Life, Work, and Caregiving. We have videos that help you from everything from learning how to manage incontinence to dealing with special diets and mobility, using walkers, how to transfer someone, a lot of really helpful medical and nursing tasks that family caregivers are doing, as well as videos on our YouTube channel. And we have webinars, learning webinars for caregivers, and a virtual community center with all kinds of activities that you can actually do with the loved ones you're caring for sometimes, like exercise classes and things like that. We have AARP Friendly Voice, which you can sign up to have your loved one get just a friendly phone call from a volunteer, just a new voice to say hi and how are you doing today and just talk for a while. We have a whole lot of veteran support, so check that out at aarp.org/veterans if you're caring for a veteran or if you are a veteran. And we also have a great deal of information on brain health. AARP is putting a lot of effort into the Global Council on Brain Health and addressing the issues of dementia. We also have a Facebook group on that's called AARP Family Caregivers Discussion Group. It's on Facebook. I moderate the group. We have almost 9,000 members right now, so I urge you to join the group. I'm in there every day. You can ask questions, you can vent, you can share your triumphs. It's an incredibly supportive community. We also have local level resources. The Community Resource Finder helps you find things in your local area. And then we also have a state and local level resource guides. AARP Rhode Island has a guide. It's just aarp.org/RI caregivers. RI caregiving. And it gives you state specific and local information about really important supports that you have in your community. AARP Rhode Island is fighting for you, and they're addressing the high cost of prescription drugs. They're looking at the lack of affordable accessible housing, and they're supporting accessory dwelling units. They're looking at long-term services and supports and supporting paid family leave as well. So if you have an issue that you're concerned about, let AARP Rhode Island know, and also lend your voice. Let your members of Congress know that you are really important, both your state legislators and your legislators at the federal level. AARP is endorsing the Bipartisan Credit for Caring Act, which would be a new non-refundable tax credit for family caregivers. So we're trying to find multiple ways to help out and to support family caregivers as both financially and practical ways, connecting you with resources at the local level. We are part of your team, and I hope you feel that it's like a safety net with all of these organizations and all of these folks behind you. Now, quickly, I want to tell you 2 more tips because I think I'm going over my time. We got a little bit of a late start. And the second tip is you've got to keep filling your tank. Taking care of yourself when you're caregiving is really the hardest thing because we're so focused on everyone else. And what I had this incident where I went to the gas station on empty. You know, you're driving in and you're on fumes and you're thinking, please don't let me break down before I get to the gas station. I had that experience while I was caregiving for all those people. And thankfully I made it, filled the car up with gas. And as I drove away, I thought, you know, it's funny, the car runs better on a full tank of gas. Well, duh, right? But it does. Pay attention next time you fill your gas tank. You'll see like the car actually does kind of run better than when you're right on, you know, don't have much in your tank. And that was my aha moment. I thought that's how I'm going to look at taking care of myself. It's not a one-time pull down the oxygen tank, the plane's going down. You may have heard that analogy. This is an everyday thing that we have to keep filling our tanks. And there are multiple ways to do it. I just want you to know it's not selfish to do so. It's just practical. The car won't run without gas. We won't run without having our internal tanks filled, both physically, emotionally, and mentally. So I find 4 ways to fill my tank. And someday I'll come back and talk to you in more detail about these. But quick things are mostly what you can do when you're caregiving. It might be just going on Facebook really quick, or calling a friend, or singing a song, or hugging the loved one, or petting the dog, or having fresh flowers in the house. Getting a good cup of coffee or tea is always a good one for me. Premium fill-ups are things like what you're doing right now, watching this presentation. Taking a class. I did Pilates once a week. That was my thing for myself. It might be that you're a golfer and you got to get 1 round of golf in now and then. You know, getting a massage, you know, getting a manicure. Tune-ups are a break from caregiving, and these are the hardest type to get. It may be that you get a break for 2 hours, and maybe a break you get for a weekend. Maybe, you know, I recommend getting a total of 2 weeks a year if you can, but that can be hard, I know. So just try to have times when you're not thinking about being responsible for anybody. It's just a break that we need mentally and physically. And then you have to have routine maintenance, just like for your car. You have to sleep well and eat healthy food and exercise and go to your doctor's appointments. And, you know what your routine maintenance is. Some of us have certain things that are kind of deal breakers for us. For me, sleep. If I don't get good sleep, I cannot function. So I made that as high a priority as I could. And sure, there were crisis times when I didn't get as much sleep, but I did the best I could to get adequate, good quality sleep. These are some of the ways that I filled my tank and filled my tank with my loved ones. We can't always do it. We can't always take care of ourselves when we're away from our loved ones. It's just not practical. So we have to do things while we're caregiving that fill us up. And I find that joy fills us up more than anything else. Joy is our greatest survival skill. So create those moments of joy. Notice those little moments of joy, and consciously experience them so they can fill you up. Third tip is to monitor your mindset. And I believe this is perhaps the most important one. You know, we see people go through caregiving experiences. They may have similar experiences, but they experience it differently because of their mindset, and they come through it differently. Buddha said that your thoughts build your life. So what you're thinking is really what shapes your experience. One way to look at this is to be aware. Okay, where am I coming from? You know, one time I had the lab had messed up my mom's labs, and I was really angry because it was hard to get her urine samples and do all those things. You know how that is, and get it to the lab and do all of that. And they had messed it up and had to do it over again. And I found myself yelling at the woman on the phone, and she put me on hold. And I said, "What is wrong with me? Why am I acting this way? This isn't who I am." And I realized I was afraid. I was afraid my mom was going to get sick or get sicker. And so I calmed down and thought, how can I come from love in this situation? Well, we solved the problem. And we just took care of it and kept moving forward. So try to be aware where you're coming from. A lot of times we're operating from fatigue. We're exhausted. And that is a really important thing to be aware of. value what you do. What you're doing is important, and no one else is going to value it if you don't. So really feel good about what you do. Choose to be adaptable and flexible and positive. It's a choice every day, multiple times a day, sometimes, to go that route. But if you make the effort to consciously make that choice, you're going to have a different mindset and you're going to experience it differently. I try to focus on what they can do, what I can do, what we can do together, rather than what we can't do. So for example, I can control my attitude. I can't control everything else. I can't be in control of everything. I can be a strong advocate for my loved ones, but I can't fix everything. I can be there for the duration. I'm never going to go away. I realized with my parents, that's success. I'm not going to leave them. But I can't stop aging, and I can't cure every disease by myself. I can get help. I can build a team. I can adjust the goals if they're not working, but I can't do everything. Like I said, I can do anything, but I can't do everything. I can accept the way things are, and accept what my other team members will do, and release that resentment, but I can't change them. I can't change another human being. I can have peace of mind and know that I'm doing the very best I can do. I'm not going to please everyone, but I know in my heart that I did the very best I could do. And I can be resilient. I can bounce back, but I'm not superhuman. I can't take it and take it and take it and without having physical effects and that type of thing. I can't do everything, but I can, sometimes we're going to get knocked down, but you get back up. And I always try to remember why I was doing this. Now, people do it for different reasons. For some people, it's a sense of duty. For some people, it's love. Whatever your reason is, remember that you're choosing to do that. Everything we do is a choice. So when someone says, well, I didn't have a choice, nobody else would do it, that's not true. I've worked in this field for many years, and I've seen many people who have nobody looking out for them. And it's not because they don't have family. It's because someone hasn't chosen to play that role. And that helps us get out of victim mode. When you're feeling a victim of, I have to do this, and your whole mindset is very different. So give yourself credit for choosing to be there. You're not perfect. I'm not perfect. We don't have to be the perfect caregiver, but we're there and we're doing our best. That's what success is, just being there. It's all the little things that you do every day. They add up. And I know that if I can just be there, I'm going to get knocked down, but I'm going to get back up, and I'm just going to be with them on this journey. And that's the one thing I knew I could promise my parents and my sister. That waves will come along and knock you down, but you get back up, and eventually you kind of learn to ride those waves. And I know many of you know what I'm talking about. If the dogs can do it, you can do it, right? And you just learn how to go with it. Despite the challenges and the heartbreak, the incredible stress, the grief, the vast majority of family caregivers look back and say it's been a positive experience overall. So why is that? As you're going through your caregiving day, think, what am I going to feel good about when I look back? And do more of those things. I want to end with a little advice from my daddy. And again, I apologize for going a little over my time, but I think you want to hear this.
Keep cool, but don't freeze.
All right, Dad.
Okay?
Yep.
And enjoy it. Do it when you're trying to work, or do it. Fine. But enjoy it and do it. That's it. Don't fight it at all.
You've always.
You give it your best shot. Lots of people do. And lots of people don't.
That's
You
true.
hang in there.
And the one other thing.
And we, as a group,
Mm-hmm.
as far as I'm concerned, we are groups of good. Period. Whether it works out a little bit or not. The way it works out, the way it works out. The way it is.
Yep.
And do it your best shot. Okay?
Okay. You always told me don't fight the problem.
Okay, everybody agreed?
Everybody's agreed.
All right. And here's to it to everyone.
And here's to all of you. Thank you for what you're doing, whether you're supporting family caregivers or you are a family caregiver or you've been a family caregiver. Thank you. Thank you. I see you. I hear you. You choose to do this. And I'm so proud of you. And I'm so grateful for what you're doing and making a difference in this world. So I'm at this point going to stop sharing. Annie, I'm sorry, I'm gone over my time.
You are absolutely fine. We do have a little bit of time. So I'm hoping that, but I just want to say from the bottom of my heart as a caregiver as well, that you are inspiring. And I think, just, like you, like myself, we both had multiple family members that we have had to care for at the same time. And being, a long distance caregiver as well, I understand. And so, I just, I'm thinking back and just kind of listening to your whole presentation. But, one of the things I just want to say is that the hope and the resilience and the joy that you are able to sort of show and maintain. And I'm sure not every one of those moments in those days was as joyful as they were. But can you talk about just a little bit more about how you were able to sort of maintain that energy and the power because you had so many multiple different experiences that you were going through and family members with their conditions. So
yes, I think that when I talked about filling my tank, I really think that is part of why I was able to do that, because you can't, there's a lot of analogies. You can't pour water from an empty cup. There's all of that. And if I didn't keep having something that kind of gave me a lift, how could I give somebody else a lift? I do think I inherited my dad's optimism, and that helps me. It was, I do look back and I think, how did I do this? I do. I look back now and I think, but in the time, I was just going. I think, I recognized very early on what a difference joy made. As a music therapist, I was trained to be very observant of people, and I could see what lit my parents' faces up, what helped them connect more, I could see those things. And so I really made an effort to consciously create joy. And I have two videos that you can find online. One is about noticing joy and one's about creating joy. And I think you have to do both. You have to be able to notice that, like I always think of when I would help mom get in bed at night, and my mom always pulled her covers right up to her chin and laid there, and she never moved all night. And she was just so sweet and in there. And I'd say, Mom, you look so cute. And I'd give her a kiss on her cheek and she'd just smile. And I knew she felt safe and secure. And that just gave me so much joy. And I could easily have just missed that completely because I was going on to clean the bathroom or do whatever, the next task. So taking the time to notice those everyday joys, to have fresh flowers in the vase, because we started that because it made my mom happy. And then I continued it after she died because it reminded me of her and it gave me joy. And I saw how it filled me up too. But you also have to create joy. You have to create those opportunities. And I think with dementia, that's one of the harder things. As the dementia progresses, it's harder and harder to find things that could make my dad smile, make my dad connect. So I had to also adjust what was giving him joy, and knowing that, like that song that I showed you, the recording Side by Side, where he didn't have a smile on his face, and my dad was a big, smiley, wonderful guy. And, but he felt close to me. He was connecting. He was right in sync with me. And by singing that song with him, I was creating joy for him and thereby creating joy for me. That's a small example, the little things that you can do. But I also went to great effort. We had fun Friday adventures before my mom died. Every Friday she'd get her hair done, and then we'd go out to eat, or we'd go to the mall, or we'd take a drive, or just anything, to feel like this is our this is our, our adventure day. So sometimes those things take a lot of effort. And sometimes they can be as much more simple as, I'm going to make a pitcher of iced tea. Let's all sit down and have an iced tea. They can be simple things as well. I hope
Yeah,
that
I mean,
answers your question.
no, that's, absolutely, and I think one of our registrants, she says, it's about making lemonade. And I think that's just a great, finding
Yes.
those moments of joy that you can. And then, sometimes they come very easily. And then other times we have to, make that conscious,
Yes.
decision that we're going to, look and find those types of moments of joy that we
Right.
can bring joy into our life. And the other thing too that I just was very impressed with, it was that, when you created who was your team. And I think so many times that our families don't recognize all those individuals who have who can participate in our in our caregiving journey, and that we don't we're not mindful about, and when we don't appreciate. So
Yes, yeah. When I first went to Arizona, I felt so alone because most of my support system was in the DC area, my friends and everything, my boyfriend. And I had one sister. My one sister was living there, but she had my niece who had special needs and was very caught up in that. And she helped out as much as she could at the time, but I felt pretty alone in it. And that's when I got my concierge, and I could pay Debbie $12 an hour, and 2 hours of Debbie was like 20 hours of somebody else. Like, she would just get things done. And whether it was reorganizing a closet or running errands for me or checking on my parents when I was out of town. But then, I started really, okay, the hairstylist, the grocery store where my parents had shopped for 30 years. Two of the clerks volunteered to go check on him when I was out of town and bring him any groceries they needed. Like, that's amazing, right? And so the more that I kind of broadened my view of the team, and especially as Alzheimer's progressed, the team got bigger, it got broader, and we eventually had the VA, and I really didn't feel so alone, you know?
And that is, absolutely crucial, because I think so many of our families do feel alone, and they do. And they feel, one of the things you touched upon earlier in your talk was how, many of our families feel like I'm the only one who can take care of my loved one. And, we need to kind of let go of that belief that, we're the only ones, and that, that person, that we're caring for can get joy and care from someone. It may not be exactly how we want them to be done, but that person is caring for them. They're enjoying that time with that individual, and it's giving us time for ourselves.
Yes, I mean, it is really hard. I think that's one of the hardest things for me was putting, especially my parents, in someone else's care for periods of time. I remember one morning, it was after mom had died, and I was really dad's touch point. And later, my sister from Ohio moved, and I didn't mention this, but she moved, and then her sons moved, and all lived with us for a year, which was pretty hectic, and it was tough. But then the house next door came open for rent, so they moved in next door. And so my sister then, and so they, I want to say that was the last 2 years of dad's life, maybe 3, no longer than that. Yeah, maybe 4 years or so. And so my sister and I were his, mom had been his North Star, and we became his North Stars. And so it was very hard leaving him. And I had some paid caregivers as well. And, we had quite a jigsaw puzzle of care I put together. But one morning I had to go to my office. I had rented an office when my parents moved back in with me because I couldn't work in the home. And dad, I said, Dad, I'm going to work, and he was like, oh, I wish you wouldn't go. Please stay here with me. And it was just heartbreaking for me because that wasn't normal for him. He didn't do that all the time. And so I sat down and spent some more time with him, and it still makes me cry to think about, how he felt. And I just, I talked to him until he felt better and said I'd be back for dinner, and, all of that. And I got the caregiver doing something with him. But that is hard. It's hard to entrust someone. No one else is going to do it like we do it. but they can do good enough often.
So I just, I definitely can honor the joy that you had with your wonderful furry friend. And I
Yeah.
know that, pets and can be such a, um, inspiration and be such a gift for, our loved ones, that they're part of our family. So, I
Yes.
just thank you for sharing so much about your furry friend. So,
Yeah,
very
Mr.
sweet.
Jackson was amazing, and we were fortunate to have him trained as a service dog, so he
Oh,
could go everywhere with my dad, because that was the key thing, was especially leaving the house became very difficult for dad. He would become extremely anxious, and as long as Mr. Jackson was with him, and it also gave me peace of mind to know, before they moved back in the house with us, I wasn't there with him all the time, and dad was still pretty high functioning, but he could get lost, and Mr. Jackson always made sure he was okay. So yeah, it was a wonderful gift. But as you say, many people have pets, and many people tell me about their robotic pets and their loved ones who become very, loved ones with dementia who become very, very close with those robotic pets, and they serve a wonderful purpose for them.
Yeah, we're very fortunate here in Rhode Island that we actually have one of the inventors of some of the mechanical.
Oh, do you?
Yeah, so we're really excited about that. And I just, music is also, just one of my big joys. And, I see that with your training as a musical therapist, that your whole family loved, music, and you just found so many reasons to use music with the care of your dad. Can you talk just a little bit more about that?
Right. So, music therapy is the use of music as a tool to achieve non musical goals. And music therapists are trained. We have quite a rigorous, it's a college degree. You can get a master's degree. We have to do internships and everything. So, if you're not a trained music therapist, you can't do music therapy. But music can be a great tool for all caregivers to use. So if you have access to a music therapist, by all means try that. And there are many private practice music therapists now who will come to your home and do individual sessions and that type of thing with your loved ones. But you, as I said, can use music, kind of develop your own playlists. I did get smart speakers by the end of the caregiving journey with daddy, and I absolutely loved them, because I could say, I have one in the room here, so I'm not going to say that A word, but the name that you can get, like you can say, okay, I'll say, Alexa, play classical music. And she will start playing I don't know if you can hear that, but she's starting to play classical music. But I could do that, and it was wonderful for my dad, because it was an atmosphere thing for him. Now, again, my dad was very musical, and it may be that he reacted even more. But remember, I worked in adult daycare and nursing homes, and everyone in those, very few people didn't respond to music. And one of the reasons music is good with dementia is because your brain processes music differently. It uses both sides of this is a really simplified explanation, but it uses both sides of the brain. And so there's more to be used. It doesn't just, like, language is just one part of the brain. And so a person with dementia who has brain damage has an advantage with music. And that's one of the reasons it can be really helpful. It's why you might have heard of melodic intonation therapy, where like when my mom had their stroke, she was trying to learn to talk again, and she would sing because, again, that was engaging the brain in a different way. So there's so many different ways for using music. And again, I would use something really calming. My dad did not wake up well. So we would start with something classical, like I'm playing now with him as he was waking up. And then I gradually pep it up to the point where we wanted him. And that's a music therapy technique that, I'd go from the classical to some show tunes, because he liked the show music. And then I'd go to some more peppy dance 1940s music. And that kind of, by that time, he was, he was able to get out of bed, you know. And then after his shower, when he was tired and he'd be resting, I would play, you know, music, and he had headphones. My dad, you may have noticed my dad had headphones on in all those pictures. He was hearing impaired, but couldn't handle the hearing aid. So it was called a pocket talker. It's just a microphone clipped to his pocket with the headphones. And we would clip that to an iPod or to the TV, where we played music on the TV with headphones. And that often is really helpful with people when they don't seem to respond to it in the room. It zeroes it in more. It's easier for the brain to take in.
Mm-hmm.
So you can always try headphones as well. And I can remember, you know, and truly it helped me too, because sometimes I'd play the music for me. I remember one time, it was in the summertime and it gets very hot in Arizona, and it was Dad was having a rough day. He was just, you know, didn't want to do anything. And so I started playing Christmas music, because it was so hot and I was getting depressed that he was having such a hard day, and it changed both his mood and my mood immediately. We both started singing the Christmas carols. He was in a great mood then, and I felt in a better mood. So, you know, every now and then I just played Christmas music.
That's amazing. Yeah, you know, music is such a powerful thing. We're kind of for us going to be wrapping up, but I just wanted to let you know about some of the kind of sort of the private chat comments about you being with us today. But you know, again, so many people are just saying thank you so much for sharing your journey with us today. And I don't know if you knew this, but yesterday at our conference, we actually were able to give away 50 copies of your book. And one of our attendees yesterday just says, thank you so much for this really valuable resource. Enjoying reading it. So,
good.
Yeah. So
good. I hope you find it helpful. All of you who got books, I hope you find it helpful. And you can find the books from the AARP website or on Amazon as well.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So,
yeah.
So
but I was going to say, be sure to look at all of the free resources too on the AARP website, because we have some really great resources there too.
You know, and we'll be sharing those, you know, in the coming days. We'll be sharing that full list of all the resources that Amy is talking about. And we'll be sharing Amy's PowerPoint, her slides with you, so you can be mindful of some of the wonderful suggestions that she's had during this time with us today. So Amy, on the bottom of my heart and from, you know, in honor of the Alzheimer's Association Rhode Island chapter, we just want to thank you so much for being with us today. It's a great pleasure of mine to, you know, to have this conversation with you today. And, you know, we just encourage everybody to, you know, go to AARP, look at all the resources that Amy's talking about. And, you know, we just hope you have a beautiful day, and just thank you so much for, you know, giving your heart to our caregivers throughout the country. So blessings.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity, and sending you all a big hug.